Hello, my name is Daniel Yuck. Thank you for watching today. I appreciate you, your time, and your support. In today's video, I want to dive into ink splatter and ink pulling and why it happens. And I also want to show you some ways that we can go about preventing ink splatter and pulling. So by the end of this video, you will be well acquainted with some tips that you can immediately apply on your end. So that way you could experience less splatter and pulling. Should you have any questions at all, I'm going to encourage you to drop a comment down below. Rest assured, I'm going to do my absolute best to assist you in the best possible direction. Please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and ring that bell for me, as I will be bringing more videos like this for you all. I do also have social medias under the same name as my YouTube. I have Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok, all under Daniel Yuck. I would appreciate the support over there as well. With that being said, let's get right on into this. Let's start with the gear that we see right here. I will be leaving my Amazon affiliate links and other affiliate links for you in the description below, so you can check out the gear featured right here in this video. I do have an Amala Grand tattoo machine. This is a third-party wireless power supply. Right here I have Mummy Triple Black Tattooing ink. I have an assortment of needles. This is a GMK Blue Gem. Here we have a Ghost Spider standard 9-round liner. Here we have a Big Wasp, as you can see, 0013 round shader. Wormhole standard 14 round shader. We do have Wormhole 009 round shader. This is a 3-round liner, and I believe this is going to be DK Labs. I believe this is going to be called a Warrior tattoo needle, if I remember correctly. So 3-round liner right there. Here is a CNC Police 007 mag. And right here we have Mycia 0011 round shader. I do have some standard ink caps with a small slab of Reelskin fake skin with a wooden stick, and this ointment right here is Ink Ease Pink ointment. That is everything that I'm going to be using to demonstrate and get my points across within this video. Let's start here. With ink pulling and ink splatter, I want to talk about some main reasons why we may be experiencing some sort of splatter or pulling along the way. And these reasons are some that I've experienced, but they're not limited to these. There may be more outside of what I'm saying here. So if I don't mention a reason why you've experienced ink splatter or pulling, drop it in the comment section down below. Some main reasons why I've experienced ink pulling and splatters along the way are because my voltage was too high. So when I would dip in for ink, it would kind of just start shooting my ink out and therefore creating a mess on my canvas. Another reason is where I would have my needle too far out, and I feel what was happening was my needle wasn't retracting into the cartridge to get ink on the needle. It was kind of just going to a certain extent, so like my needle was too far out, so when it would retract back in, it would never fully retract to absorb ink. So therefore when it would retract, every time it was doing it, it would just shoot out ink. So my needle settings were too far out, which is another reason why I've experienced ink splatter, pulling, and a mess. Another reason why I've also experienced ink pulling and splatter is because I tend to kind of dip the cartridge too far into my ink cap. Therefore, too much ink got pulled into my cartridge. Therefore, when I went down to apply any sort of technical application within tattooing, every time I put my needle down, there was just a pool of ink just there beating at the end. I'm actually going to demonstrate what that looks like here, and I'm going to show you ways to go about fixing that. Another reason why I have experienced splatter and pulling along the way is because when I was applying the tattoo, technically I may have been pressing down a little too hard, and when I was doing that, it was creating a mess and kind of like an outpour of ink here when pressing too hard, applying too much pressure. Another reason, and this one's not really too common, but I have experienced it, is where the tattoo needle cartridge could have been like a dud. It was like a poor design, or something specific may have went wrong with a specific cartridge. Therefore, when I put it in there, the behavior was sparse, sporadic, and unpredictable. Sometimes it would pull, sometimes it would just spray ink everywhere. You get the idea. So poor design and poor gear can contribute to splatter and pulling along the way. Once again, it's important to remember that these are my main reasons why I've experienced pulling, and they're not limited to that. So if you have any other experiences, again, drop them down below. Another uncommon reason as well that I've experienced ink pulling and splatter is using wrong inks. So let's say, for example, if I'm running at a higher voltage, like around 7 or 8, and I'm going to be using like a 20, 40, 60% gray wash, I'm bound to get more spray than I would have using an ink designed for what I am, the technical application that I am doing. So you kind of get the idea. If we're using the wrong inks as well, we can be experiencing a lot of ink pooling and splatter, but this one's a little bit more on the uncommon end. What I want to do is I want to pour out some Mummy Triple Black here, and I want to start doing some demonstrations here, and I want to demonstrate what ink splatter and pooling looks like, and then I can show you some ways that we can go about fixing that. It does happen, but I'm not going to pay too much attention to that mess there, and neither should you. I want to start with here. Let's go ahead and start with this 009 round shader from Wormhole. So let me show you some common ways that I've experienced ink pulling. So for example, right now I am at 6 volts. Let's say if I typically run like around 7.5, let's even go to 8. Right now I'm at 8.1, and you can kind of hear that this needle is working, the machine is screaming. So if I were to go ahead and dip into here, and I were to fully submerge my ink, my tip cartridge in here, I'm going to be withdrawing or pulling in a lot of ink, probably more than I want. At this high of a voltage, when I take it out, I should be probably pushing out the ink more than keeping it in the cartridge because it's just overfilled. This right here is probably the most common way that I've ever experienced ink pooling and splatter. So you can see I'm running at a really high voltage, and you can see if I go ahead and put my whole cartridge in here, which is pretty common practice when we first start, you can see that I'm already getting droplets and kind of some splatter right here. If you really look, if I just hold the machine right here, you're gonna see that it's actually pushing out ink on microscopic levels there. But if I hold it, you're gonna start seeing it build up. It's gonna be the same thing. Even if I move to the fake skin, it's gonna be doing that. So you can see how it's still spurting out ink, and it'll stop eventually when it's not so full to do that. But now when I move over to fake skin and I begin to apply my tattoos, I'm going to be experiencing large amounts of pulling. So allow me to kind of remove this little dot here. I'm going to kind of approach this. I'm going to approach this the same way that I would as if I were tattooing here. So I'm going to put some ointment in my area there. I'm running at a high voltage, and you can see automatically, even with my needle hanging that far out, I'm still experiencing all of this pulling here. I can't see my needle, and if I start putting a little bit of pressure, you're going to see how I get a lot of splatter. And then you're going to see that the whole entire way through this line, I just experienced large amounts of pulling and kind of a big mess. This right here was an accident that wasn't supposed to happen, so I kind of overlooked that as well. But you get the idea. So this right here is the #1 reason why I've experienced pulling and a more hectic workflow. Although I'm able to line, I have to move a little bit faster, which makes me more prone to more mistakes. But not only that, this sort of pulling right here is what I've experienced when I tend to be running too high at a voltage and then dipping for too much ink. You can kind of see that within that workflow right there, if I'm using a high voltage and then I'm submerging my needle there, with this sort of a workflow and approach, you can see all of the adversities that come about from that approach. I don't really recommend running at a higher voltage. For me personally, I find that running at around maybe 6.5, 7 as of lately is a sweet spot for me. I kind of like running at 6 volts even because I am able to slow my flow down and saturate the needle, which allows me to make fewer mistakes and wobbles along the way. If I can slow my workflow down just a little bit more and make less mistakes, I'm going to do that. So running at a higher voltage can be a good reason as to why you may be experiencing splatter, and picking up too much ink may be a reason why you may be experiencing too much pulling. You can see right here within this cartridge, there's just a little bit of ink within the tube there. If I were to take my voltage down to around, let's say 6 even, you can see now when I place my needle down, I can see my needle tip here. And if I wanted, I'd be able to complete a line, and I'd be able to move a lot slower, causing less trauma to the skin. And you can see that I'm experiencing a lot less splatter. Even holding the needle here, you're going to see that no ink is splattering out. So instantly, that is one way that we can fix our issue with splatter. We can go about fixing the splatter issue by lowering our voltage down. Let's say if you're running at 7.5 or 8 volts, try to go to around 6 and then start there. To get the idea, there's still a little bit more ink, if you can see right here. So therefore I could, as you can see, commit to a line. I'm able to see my needle tip with minimal splatter. All of these little outpours right here can be cleaned up with a simple dab. As you can see, they're gone. This is a much cleaner workflow. Now, let's say if you want to have this sort of workflow the entire way through, this is how you would do that. Every time you dip back into your ink, instead of dipping your tube the way that I showed you, where you dip the actual plastic part into your ink cap, all you're going to want to do is just simply put the needle in there like so. As you saw, as soon as I put the needle into the ink cap, we started picking up ink. You can see that I have a little bead right here. If you don't like that, what you can do is just simply dab it onto the side of a napkin, and there you go, problem solved. And then we can continue with pretty much the same workflow that we had a little while ago. So if I go ahead and moisturize the area, and I create a line, for example this way, you can see that I'm experiencing minimal splatter, and I can see my needle tip the entire way through, which is going to allow me to do cleaner work. I need to be able to see where my needle is going so that way I can keep my depth consistent and I can keep the stencil accurate to what we agreed upon with the client and I. You get the idea. So that is a way that we can go about keeping a smooth workflow and a clean workspace, is by simply just dipping the needle into the cap like so. Again, if you notice that you got a little bit too much, you can always have like an ink cap or use your napkin and just simply dab like so, removing just a little bit of the excess. And then you can continue with the same process. So you can see now I'm not experiencing the same sort of pulling or splatter that I was when I fully submerged my needle tip. I'm sorry, my cartridge rather. This is just with the needle tip right here. Each and every time we get a smooth workflow, and I'm also running at 6 volts even. You can see we've gone over the voltage being too high and the needle being too far out, and then I dipped my needle in there and I showed you all what happens when that occurs. So that is typically the main reason why we experience splatter, because you can see I'm still hanging my needle far out. Let's say if I were to adjust this, and let's say if I bring my needle in, when we first start out as beginners, we tend to really hang our needle out like really close. We don't really like to hang the needle to avoid blowouts, which is understandable. You can see that right here, I don't have nearly the same depth. This can be a recipe for pulling. So let's say if I chose to line using this sort of needle setting, let's say even if I were just to dip the very tip of the needle in there, we may still be experiencing pulling, as you can see, because there's not enough space in between the needle and the tube. And then when you see, when you do it like this, for example, setting the setting like this, you're gonna notice that not only are we still experiencing pulling, but the cartridge itself is actually hitting the skin. So watch right here. And then you can see this is where we start experiencing pulling, when the plastic tubing hits the skin. This is called riding the tube. And this is another main reason why we can also be experiencing pulling. This is gonna be directly correlated to the needle depth settings right here. You can see that my needle depth setting is off, so therefore it's gonna produce these sort of results. Now, let's say if I were to have these sort of settings and I were to dip the way we would as a beginner, you can see although we may not be experiencing splatter, we are experiencing some drip right here, which is definitely going to contribute to pulling. And let me show you this way. So you can see we can't see our line anymore, and as a beginner this is what we want to stay away from. This isn't going to help us in any way, shape, or form. In fact, this may actually discourage us. So you can see that having incorrect needle depth settings is definitely going to cause a lot of unwanted adversities when tattooing. You kind of want to get comfortable with hanging out the needle and just relying on the feel of creating the line. I know it may seem like a daunting task at first, but that is a far better way to go. You would be able to avoid pulling and all of this in general. So let's say if I were to hang my needle out a little bit more, like around here, this seems like a more healthier place where I can see my needle tip The needle's still retracting far back enough to bring ink out. And this is a lot cleaner because I don't have my plastic tubing touching the skin. So that right there is how we would go about combating pulling and riding the tube, by simply adjusting the needle from somewhere around here to somewhere around here. You don't have to hang it a crazy amount out, but maybe just a little bit more is going to be enough. And you can see that my tube is actually really close to touching the skin, but it's not. And then from here you can kind of build up different settings and find out where you like best. I like to kind of hang my needle out right here, where I can always see my needle tip. And that right there is how I would go about correcting the issue where I'm riding the tube and having a heavy pulling from having tube touch the skin. That is the way that we would go about correcting that. Along the way, I have showed you what it's like when we pull too much ink into the cartridge. So let me go ahead and touch base on that one a little bit again here. So I'm gonna pull too much ink into this cartridge, and I'm also gonna demonstrate what too much pressure would look like. And I'm still gonna run at 6 volts. Let's say if I was running at a higher voltage, let me go to 7.5. When we're just starting out, we tend to think that a higher voltage is gonna do the trick for us. So I'm gonna kind of use that sort of beginner logic here. What I'm gonna do from here is I'm going to submerge my needle within the ink cap like this. I'm gonna bring it out. And you can see already we're experiencing this mess right here. This is a catastrophe off the bat. So you can see that I put too much ink into my cartridge here. And then now I'm running at 7.5, which is also contributing to the spurting here. And then if I were to go and create a line, you're gonna see that I'm not able to see anything, which is pulling. So I made a series of bad choices, and this is the workflow that I get. This is a direct result from dipping for too much ink. As you can see, I'm putting the tip like that, and this is a direct result from that. And as you can see, if I were to go over here and add too much pressure, now I'm starting to get splatter and pulling, and you can see that the splatter's coming way out here as well. And let's say if I were to repeat this process every time I tattoo, this is essentially what it's going to look like. And you can kind of get the idea. It's just a mess and a disaster. This is heavy pulling, this is heavy splatter. This is all a direct side effect from multiple things that are going wrong, which are me dipping too far, me having too high of a voltage, and me pressing down too hard. If I were to correct these issues, so let's take it down from 7.5 to 6 even. We can even do 5.4. Let's do 5.4. You can see that I have a little bit of ink here, so I'm not gonna go back for any more, and I'm not gonna press down with excessive force. I'm gonna be natural with my touch here, as you can see. And I'm going to bring it this way. As you can see, even my needle depth, it's set a little close for me. However, I'm still not riding the tube, and I'm still getting clean results. I could even go ahead and take it out a few more notches if I want. This is kind of the ballpark of where I like for my settings to be, with the amount of ink that I like to work with at a time. So what that means is once I'm done with this smaller area, I can go ahead and kind of continue. And then I'm gonna know when I'm running out of ink, the machine and the needle, well, not the machine, but the needle tips will tell me. And that's kind of what I pay attention to, just kind of look at my needle tips. You can see that I still have a generous amount of ink right here. The ink is still saturated under my needle tip, which lets me know that I'm able to go for a few more. When I start losing that saturation is when I know that I'm gonna be losing consistent ink flow, which lets me know that I'm gonna have to be dipping back pretty soon. But you can see over and over again, haven't dipped back in there, that I can create all of these lines right here. So this would be me adding all the details within my tattoo. I wouldn't need to go back for more. You can see I'm still getting a little ways through this design right here. And right around now is when I'm starting to notice that I'm experiencing a little bit of inconsistency within my ink flow. And if I keep going, you're gonna notice that all of a sudden it's probably just gonna stop putting out ink. And that means I'm ready for more ink. And now I'm at the point where I am getting inconsistent results. I no longer have ink all the way throughout my needle, as you can see here. Okay, and this is what it looks like when we're pretty much out of ink. I'm just getting the last bits here, and there's no more. When I get to that, I mean, obviously before this I would have wanted to have dipped back into the ink cap, but when I do go back in for ink now, I'm not going to submerge my needle. I'm not going to submerge my cartridge. I'm actually just going to tap the needle to the surface of the ink there, and you're going to see that it does in fact pick up more ink. Very clean and smooth workflow all the way throughout our tattoos. So this right here can save us from losing our stencils. This right here can give us a smooth, clean workflow throughout the entire process, which is what we want. That right there was direct side effects from taking too much ink into the cartridge and applying too much pressure. You can see that it can get pretty bad, and these are things that we want to stay away from when we are tattooing. The thing with ink splatter and pulling is that it really is unpredictable. All gear is gonna splatter and pull differently, and all ink is gonna pull out and splatter differently as well. There isn't really any uniform way or any uniform behavior that we're gonna get from splattering or pulling along the way. We have to just kind of try the gear out and see which one works best for us. So right here I have a GMK 11 round liner. You can see that I'm running at a healthy voltage of 5.4. If I were to kind of approach this with all the correct moves here, you can see that I'm just putting in a little bit of ink into my needle tip right here. I'm going to go ahead and try this cartridge out, so you can see how we get a little bit of variation within performance here than we did from the Wormhole needle. You can see I'm not experiencing any splatter, just slight pulling that I'm definitely not mad at. I would rather have it like that and make sure that my line is going to be nice and saturated, as opposed to having inconsistent saturation. You can see though, this is a GMK Blue Gem 11 round liner. This is standard. And now I'm getting a little bit of splatter because I am applying a little bit of pressure, so I'm getting a little bit of splatter going that way. You can see that splatter is going in reverse for this needle, as opposed to splatter typically going that way. So again, every needle is going to be a little bit unpredictable. You're not going to be able to predict any of the splattering with a specific needle. You're just going to have to go through with it and see what happens. But you can see though that I'm still getting a little bit of splatter, but again, that's not nothing that one dab can't fix. There you go, I don't even remember what the splatter was. And you can see that I'm only working with micro increments of ink, and there's still a lot, so I can keep going and applying details. However, I feel like it's important to remember that not all gear is going to behave like that. Let's say if gear is poorly designed, then we may be experiencing some adversities, maybe a lot more pulling, even if we do everything right. If you tend to experience gear like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad gear, horrible gear. It's just probably not compatible with the machine that we are using, the style that we are wanting, and the voltage that we want to use. So here is a Ghost Spider. This is going to be a standard 9 round liner, and I'm running at 5.4 volts. I'm going to adjust my needle depth to around there. I'm going to approach it the same way, where we just bring in a little bit of ink, and then I'm going to create some lines. So you can see even with this one there is a little bit of splatter, and we're getting mild pulling, but I like that sort of pulling like this. So therefore I know that my line is going to be solid and consistent and saturated. I'm not going to have any issues there. So I don't mind that sort of pulling. I only mind when it's heavy pulling. But you can see every needle does have a certain amount of splatter and a little bit of pulling going on. But this is still perfect. I can still see what I am working with. I can still see below my needle and where I am tattooing. And that is what I look for when I am tattooing. Now let's say if I brought my needle in more, okay, and let's say if I took my voltage up to like maybe 7.2, And let's say I dip again my cartridge fully in here. You can see that I'm already beading right here. So you can see that these results right here are going to be sparse and consistent. I'm going to be losing a stencil early on. I'm going to be causing a lot of pain and riding the tube the entire way. So you can see that every needle, although we may approach it technically the same with like, you know, specific voltage settings and a specific stroke along with a specific ink, every needle though is going to behave in a similar manner. You can see that I'm still getting pulling with this needle, but not as much as I did with, let's say, the Wormhole. And let's say if I were to use another needle, you're going to notice that at these specific settings, we're going to get a little bit more pulling, or we may even get less. So let's try that here. Let me kind of prove that point here. Let's say, for example, I use the 00 11 round shader from my Sia. And I'm going to keep the same exact settings. I'm not changing anything. And I go ahead and I approach it the same way where I fill it up. You can see that this is what I am experiencing here. So I'm already getting pushing out of ink there, so some splatter going on. If I were to begin creating lines, you can see I'm getting ink pulling and splatter quite a bit. And if I were to kind of bring it in to where a beginner would use it, these are the direct results that I'm gonna get. Although I may be able to work with this, I would prefer for it not to pull up so much. But you get the idea. Every needle is different, so we can expect a little bit of variations in terms of behavior when it comes to splatter and pulling from needle to needle. But nonetheless, the same rule of thumb does apply. If we are running our voltage too high, then we're gonna be experiencing a lot of spitting and splatter. If our needle is hanging out too far, then we may get inconsistent ink deposit. If we are putting our cartridge too much into the ink and drawing too much ink in it, then we're gonna experience a lot of pulling. Again, it really doesn't matter what needle we are using. These fundamental rules of voltage being too high, needle being too far out, pulling in too much ink are still going to cause adversity. So these are things that we really want to pay attention to. Again, just a quick recap, some great ways that we can go about avoiding splattering and pulling is to run at a healthy voltage. Have a good needle depth setting set that you are comfortable with and that you can anticipate the results. Avoid dipping your needle into your ink cap. Avoid dipping your cartridge into your ink cap and just dip the needle tip and then let that draw the ink into the needle. Therefore, you may have a smoother workflow. Again, results are going to vary, but you get the idea. This is a great place to start. Also, another great thing to do would be to fine-tune your technical application, which means when you actually start applying tattoo to skin, you're not pressing down too hard, causing splattering or spurting or, pulling along the way. So fine-tuning your technique and knowing how to use just the very tips of the needles to apply a tattoo is going to go a long way as well. The last thing that I would recommend is to use good gear that you are comfortable with. Another thing that can really help us avoid pulling is adding a thin layer of ointment. You never want to add too much, nor do you want to add too little, but you do want to add a nice thin layer of ointment to the area that you're going to tattoo before you tattoo it, and this also helps the ink pull in a more uniform manner. So if you are going to be experiencing even slight pulling like I did, having a thin layer of ointment can help keep that pulling of ink in a nice uniform manner to where you can just simply dab away and see your true line that you did. That is another good tip that you can use to experience lighter pulling. If you have any questions at all, I encourage you to drop a comment down below and I'm going to do my absolute best to assist you in the best possible direction. That'll be it for this one. Please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and ring that bell for me, as I am going to be bringing more videos like this for you all. I do also have social medias under the same name as my YouTube channel. I have Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok, all under Daniel Yuck. I would appreciate the support over there as well. With that being said, I thank you for your time and I appreciate you watching. You have a great day. Are you wanting to develop your tattooing skill sets? Now you can practice and develop anytime, any place with an assortment of tattooing workbooks that I've created. With these assorted tattooing workbooks, we can practice our basic lining all the way to advanced lining. We can practice shading, shading placement, dot work, textures, and more. All we are going to need is a tattoo workbook of mine. We can use a pencil, pen. We can even use a tattoo machine with a ballpoint cartridge to develop our tattooing abilities further. That means that we don't need tattoo ink, we don't need napkins or petroleum jelly to get to practicing. Simply open one of my tattooing workbooks and get going. It really is that easy. You can get your hands on one of my developmental tattooing assorted workbooks by simply clicking the links in my description or in the pinned comment section below, or navigating on over to Amazon.com, typing in Daniel Yuck, and you'll see all of the assorted tattoo workbooks that I've created come up. If you have an Amazon account, be sure to follow my Amazon author page as well, as I would greatly appreciate your support. Should you have any questions at all, drop them in the comment section down below. I will do my best to assist you in the best possible direction. With that being said, let's get right back into this video. Are you needing or wanting tattoo guidance? What about 4K high quality step-by-step follow-along tattoo sessions? Or maybe one-on-one tattoo support to get answers to your questions that are specifically tailored to your wants and needs as the artist? You can now become a Patreon where you will gain access to high quality 4K exclusive step-by-step follow-along tattoo sessions. I will be tattooing with you in a one-on-one step-by-step manner where I will be explaining what I am doing and why every step of the way. I will also be doing this in a high quality 4K format for your optimal viewing experience. On top of the one-on-one support and on top of the step-by-step tattoo session guidance, you will also gain access to exclusive tattoo stencils that you can download and place on your end to further develop your skill sets. I will leave a link for you in the description or in the pinned comment section below, or you can head on over to patreon.com/Daniel Yuck. When you become a Patreon, you will be getting one-on-one support where you can ask me as many questions as you'd like that are specifically tailored to your wants and needs as the artist. You will gain access to exclusive tattoo stencils that you can download and practice on your end. You'll also gain access to exclusive high quality 4K footage where I walk you through each and every tattoo session in a one-on-one step-by-step manner where I explain all the what's and whys along the way. Become a Patreon today. Thank you for your support in advance. I greatly appreciate you.